Hi there, and welcome to the Future Makers podcast by MEND. This is where we talk to people from scientific and high-tech organizations with a purpose. I'm Angina Herman, and Aveli Idavain is hiding under the hood. Well, not really hiding. Now she's right there in front of the camera, but she's there to make sure everything runs. Say hi to everyone, Ave.
Hello, everyone.
And today we get to speak with Arthur Woods. Arthur is the founder and CEO of Astrostrom, a Swiss startup and a think tank that wants to provide space-based solar power for Earth. Welcome, Arthur.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. Glad to be here. Good morning.
So, can you tell us, Arthur, why does your company Astrostrom exist?
Well, the purpose of Astrostrom, and actually, Astrostrom is the German word for astroelectricity. And a fellow named Mike Sneed in the United States wrote a book called Astroelectricity. So it's bringing electricity from space. Okay, so we wanted to broaden this idea in the German part of the world, and that's why we adopted the name Astrostrom. And it's actually a very catchy name in the German part of the world. But yes, our purpose is to provide clean energy from space to the world, starting with Switzerland maybe, but throughout the world. And we've actually we did a study for the European Space Agency that we were selected in 2020 to do this study called the Greater Earth Lunar Power Station, which is a really novel approach to space-based solar power. It's different than almost all other concepts. I mean, the end goal is the same, is to provide clean energy from space to Earth, but our approach was to go to the moon in order to build solar power satellites from lunar materials. And it's not 100% totally new idea. There's been several ideas about using lunar resources for providing energy to space, but these earlier projects were mostly to beam actually power from the moon all the way to Earth, which is actually has a higher challenge than what we're doing. But anyway, to make the story short, we submitted a proposal to make a lunar power station. The idea is to provide energy or electricity down to the moon for lunar operations, so you could actually power a manufacturing process. And we would build a solar power satellite from lunar materials there to do this. And if that idea would work and prove to be feasible, then it could be scaled up in order to build solar power satellite components from lunar materials that we could then send solar power satellites to Earth from the moon, basically, or at least the components to geostationary orbit for assembly. And this would actually reduce the amount of mass that has to be launched from Earth by 80% or more. And this is a big factor because solar power satellites are very big. I mean, they're rather more than a kilometer in dimensions, maybe several kilometers, and they weigh between, let's say, 2,000 to 10,000 metric tons for one satellite. So you can imagine just what that would take to launch these from Earth. So you're talking about hundreds of starships to launch one solar power satellite. Whereas if our concept proves feasible, we can reduce that amount of mass by 80% or more. And this would make the whole idea of space-based solar power perhaps, first off, more feasible, that we don't have this logistics problem. And also, launching that many rockets from Earth, you actually would impact on the atmosphere. So this is an environmental thing. And we want solar power from space to be pollution-free and widely acceptable. So we would like to mitigate that aspect too. So that's why our approach is quite unique and interesting. And we're the only company in the world that is pursuing this particular idea. And there's about 20 concepts right now in the world, in the United States, in England, Australia, South Korea, China, of course, Japan. These countries are all looking at, because there's a lot of new interest in space solar power, because everybody's looking to address the climate and the energy situation on Earth. So there's a renewed interest in space solar power. But we're the only one that has this approach, and we think it's a very valuable approach, and it should be pursued not as an alternative to the other concepts, but in parallel. And
Mm-hmm.
going to the moon seems to be a topic among a number of nations. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
that's interesting too, because Artemis program in the United States, they have about 40 nations that have signed on to join the Artemis program, including Switzerland just a few months ago joined the Artemis Accords. And Artemis is interesting to go back to the moon as sort of like Apollo, but better. And their idea is to, to go back to the moon and have a woman astronaut and maybe an astronaut of color on the
Mm-hmm.
moon, but to do exploration and science and get things going. And but it's more on this level, the typical space exploration motivation, and
Mm-hmm.
also as in parallel to Artemis, you have the Chinese-Russian concept called the International Lunar Research Station, and they have about 10 countries signed up to work with them to develop uh, a lunar base on the moon, and it's also for exploration and also for obviously political advantages. So our approach is not about exploration. Our approach is a business case. We see the
Mm-hmm.
multi-trillion energy market on Earth is a way to pay for going to the moon, and doing all of this stuff. So we actually have a business case for going to the moon and not just a political or a typical scientific exploration objective.
So can you tell me a bit more about this technology? So I mean, space-based solar power. What is it exactly? I mean, I'm sure some of our, particularly the space listeners, will know what it is, but how does that work? What does it do?
Well, first off, the idea is not really new. It's been around since for 50 years. Okay, NASA looked at it quite a lot. Uh, after the first moon landing and stuff like that, and there was a lot of enthusiasm. The idea actually goes back to Isaac Asimov. He mentioned something like this in a book he
Mm-hmm.
wrote called Reason, uh, and Gerald O'Neill developed the idea quite a lot in the United States. And anyway, the basic idea is you have a lot of sunlight in space, more than you have on Earth, obviously. So your access to that is much better. So you put up a large solar farm, if you want, a large satellite that's covered with photovoltaics, like we have on Earth. I mean, but it's a thing. And this would capture the sunlight, convert it into microwaves, and the microwaves would then be sent to a receiving antenna on Earth, which is a rectenna or a rectifying antenna, where it would receive the electricity, and it would convert that electricity and send it to the grid. So actually, you have a really large rectenna on Earth. It's sort of like the power plant. It's actually the power plant is the rectenna on Earth, although the solar farm is in space. So it's actually a very well understood concept. All of the technology exists today. There's not any technical breakthroughs. The idea is to demonstrate it at the scale necessary, and that hasn't happened yet. Uh, Caltech in the United States, California Institute of Technology, they recently did an in-space experiment, and they were able to detect uh, a small signal from a satellite, but nothing really significant. And in 2 years, Japan is going to launch a demonstrator that will maybe beam down a kilowatt of power, and it can be received by, like a big array antenna, like a radio telescope. And so this is going to be a test just to see if something like that can happen. But the really big thing is to get kilowatts and then megawatts and then gigawatts of power to be beamed down to space. So the scale is really, really large. And on Earth, there's been a number of demonstrations of beaming power. It does exist. In fact, I was attending in 2022 in Munich European Space Agency and Airbus, they organized a demonstration. It was carried out by a New Zealand firm called Emrod, and they're inside a big facility. They beamed power wirelessly over about 50 or 60 meters, and they lit up some lights at the other end and ran a refrigerator. So this is this is this is technology that exists, and I think the biggest record today is around. Uh, they've been able to beam power for maybe almost 2 kilometers, and but from 2 kilometers to 35,000 kilometers is a long ways to go. So there's a lot of challenges in this whole concept, but the basic technology exists. So it's people are working right now trying to get the demonstrations ready for space. So this is very exciting. So we're all at this level at the moment, because before the energy companies will come in and maybe invest in this technology, they want to see something that works. They want to, if they see a rectangle there that's putting out, some megawatts of power, they go, okay, I take 10 of those. I buy 10 of those, because they need it. But it's a matter for the space community to be able to provide adequate demonstrations of this power so that they can convince, like, say, the energy companies and the governments to get involved and to see this as a viable, not necessarily alternative. I mean, everybody wants an alternative to fossil fuels. And that's a real challenge because we still rely a lot on fossil fuels. But actually, just to add that to the energy mix, and our goals, Astrostrom's goals, are very modest in that sense. We think, for example, Switzerland. Okay, Switzerland right now, we voted to get out of nuclear power, and that's a problem for our energy mix because from nuclear power, it's about 3 gigawatts of capacity per year, and it provides something like quite a bit of Switzerland's electricity. So if we could provide the same amount of electricity as nuclear power does today in Switzerland, or anywhere else for that matter, but just to use Switzerland as an example, this would be a very valuable addition to the energy mix in Switzerland and help Switzerland have an easier time to reach its net zero goals and its energy security things, because people are realizing now that reduction of energy use is going to be very difficult if you want to meet these net zero goals. So people are really, really paying more attention. How can we have enough energy security in Switzerland? Because we enjoy our standard of living here. I mean, we want to have our internet and we want to have our electric cars and we want to have them all of the time. And this is very important. It's about the lifestyle, the standard of living we have we're always on. We use electricity constantly. Our mobile phones, our internet, our television, everything is. We live in a digital world, all our banking and stuff. So we need to have energy on demand all of the time, and that's the problem for renewable energy like solar and wind, is that it's very intermittent and it cannot provide that kind of electricity. It provides a whole lot sometimes and none at all at other times. And then it has to go in the grid, which needs to be balanced. So you need an energy source that is constant and ready to provide the electricity when it's needed. And so that's the advantage of space solar power more than any other energy source, really, because it can provide what they call band energy or base load power, which means they have plenty of power all of the time, but also that it can be adjusted very quickly to compensate for demands on the grid. So it's a beautiful concept, and if you can to do it without making pollution, then it's actually the ultimate green solution, if you want to.
So as I feel like as soon as we talk about something in space or doing anything in space, the only thing I can think about are the piles of money that it takes to do anything in space. I totally understand the fact that doing or harnessing energy pollution free and working on this, and also the reality that we need power and we need alternative methods. But how could we make this not be so much more expensive than the current methods that we have? Because it does sound expensive.
Well, I mean, it's all relevant, you know. I mean, space, it's expensive to go to space, that's for sure. But so much of our society already depends on space technology. I mean, we are totally integrated with space technology. So all of the money that's been spent today on communication satellites and Earth observation satellites, I mean, we've profited enormously from that. So the investment has been really well made. And so we have to understand that space is not only expensive, but it's also a very viable business case, if you want, for much of our society. So actually, if you would take satellites away from our society, we would have to go back 100 years in how we run things, or like 60 years. Okay, but answer your question. I mean, space solar power, to develop it is very expensive. So the studies that the European Space Agency have done, just to look at the European concept. Actually, it's under development in the UK. It's a company called Space Solar, and it's a concept called Cassiopeia, developed by Ian Cash. They, in their cost benefit studies, they said that the first space solar power satellite might cost to develop, not later on, but the first one to develop, the investment necessary would be about 16 billion euros. Okay, so I mean that's a lot of money, but it's not really. I mean, a nuclear power plant probably costs, just to build one, not to invent one, but to build one is probably today in Europe per gigawatt something like 10 billion euros per gigawatt for one nuclear power. They're cheaper in other places in the world, but in Europe it's about 10 billion per gigawatt. So it's a lot of money. That's for sure, and you have to find a way to convince investors to put up that kind of money. And but just to give some statistics, um, the total electricity generation in 2022 in the world was 29,165 terawatt hours. And you can actually put a price on that because there's a website called Global Petrol Prices that publishes constantly what the average price that people pay for electricity. Okay, so and also for each country, it's like Switzerland, it's 29 uh, Rappen per kilowatt hour, where the world average is like 14 Rappen per kilowatt hour. So you can actually calculate that the world electricity market, just using these two numbers, their official numbers, is 4.1 trillion a year. Okay, so that's the dimensions we're talking about. Now, the fossil fuels used for electricity production in 2022 was 17,667 terawatt hours. Okay, it's a large percentage of that. So the world electricity market to replace fossil fuels is 2.5 trillion a year. So everybody needs to get out of fossil fuels. So there you have this huge market there for anybody who wants to come up with an idea to replace fossil fuels. And that's the goal of the Paris Accords and everything else, is how do we get out of using not fossil fuels? And we have to get out of fossil fuels. I mean, fossil fuels have been a fantastic energy source. They've enabled our whole modern society. I mean, for 200 years, it was an easy, accessible source of energy, very easy to use, compact, portable and stuff. So we've built our whole society on it. But now we've reached a point where using fossil fuels are no longer environmentally acceptable for different reasons, okay? Not only for the climate, but for many other reasons. And secondly, fossil fuels are finite, basically. I mean, there's still a lot of fossil fuels, but they're not as easily accessible as in earlier, 100 years ago and even 50 years ago. So they're more expensive and more difficult to extract. And that makes the whole fossil fuel market more complicated and more difficult because if they get too expensive, people don't buy them. If they don't, and if they don't get enough money, people won't produce them. So we're really in this situation where we desperately need to find a replacement for fossil fuels for energy production. Okay, and worldwide, energy production from fossil fuels, mostly for transport and stuff like that, it's 82% of the, the global energy production comes from fossil fuels. Okay, 82%, and it's only gone down a little bit. I just saw the recent figures for 2023. That was 2022. It's still 85.1%. After all of the investments that the governments are making in the energy transition to renewables, it only went down 0.5%. In fact, the overall amount increased because the world is using more energy because the developing countries want to have their share of the market. So they're using more. So, and last but not least, fossil fuels are very valuable for other stuff like plastic. I mean, all of our pharmaceuticals and fertilizer, all of these other things which we use fossil fuels for, we should save them for that, and not waste them for producing energy. And that's why we have to say we need to get away from relying on fossil fuels for energy production, and especially for electricity production. Let's just start at the electricity level, and everybody's aware that this is what we should do. But it's going to be a real challenge to get away from fossil fuels totally. Because if you really wanted to, I have another chart here. If you really wanted to get if you wanted to replace fossil fuels with nuclear power, okay, it's not possible, but just to say the same amount of power, you would have to build 17,800 new 1 gigawatt nuclear power stations in order to equal the same amount of power that we're getting from fossil fuels. That's amazing. And just to do it for electricity, it's about 2,500 new nuclear power plants. Just to provide the same amount of electricity that fossil fuel provides today. And I mean, it's not possible. There's only about 460 nuclear power plants in the world today. So you can imagine going from 460 to 2,500 with all of the issues, and going to 17,000 is totally impossible. So that's the dimension we're talking about. It's just huge. And this is something that when I talk about space-based solar power, people, but it's such a huge dimension. It's as big as, I mean, we're talking about, our world in the whole solar system and in the whole system that we're in, and humanity is a technological society now, and technology needs one thing: energy. Energy runs through everything. Energy is the economy. So, we're talking about something that fossil fuels have been around for 200 years. So let's go from the fossil fuel age to the space energy age. It's not a transition, it's a transformation. And that's
So
what
how
we
far
need.
are we from having space-based solar power replace all of the fossil fuels? So how does it compare to the nuclear
We're pretty far away.
example?
We're very far away because we haven't had the first space solar power satellite yet.
Mhm.
And I guess the first one might happen in 10 years if things go forward everywhere. But as Ian Cash, who is the engineer behind the Cassiopeia, he goes, it's a function of money. And just to give you another example, everybody thinks of an alternative as fusion power, not fission, but fusion. There's a lot of research going into fusion technology. In fact, probably in the last 20 years, they've invested more than 20, maybe up to 40 billion. I think the official number is around 20 billion into fusion technology at the ITER experimental facility. 20 billion or more, okay? Space solar power in the last 50 years, the investment has been less than 500 million. And space solar power has the same potential as fusion, but everybody's thinking, oh, let's go for fusion, but they haven't really got it. And I think the problem is it's actually a problem of perception. And I think this is really key to a lot of things. And I'm writing basically. I've written a lot of text about this, but I'm going to put it into a book. But we obviously think that Earth problems must have Earth solutions. So we look around us to see how we can do something here on Earth without, to kick us. It's obviously if we live on Earth, we have to do it. And that's because we evolved on Earth. We're creatures of Earth, and this is the way we've always been. So it's a matter of perception. And what a lot of people don't realize is that our Earth is much larger than what we normally think of it. I mean, if you think of planet Earth, what do you think of? You see the picture from space, right? You see the Earth and it's surrounded by its atmosphere. That's Earth, and its dimension is 12,900 something kilometers in diameter. Well, actually, that's wrong in terms of in the cosmic sense, because actually, humanity in the last 60 years has extended the dimensions of Earth by launching all of these satellites. These all are part of Earth mass, so we actually go out beyond geostationary orbits. So the diameter of Earth is not 12,000, it's like 80,000 kilometers in diameter. Well, we don't think of that, but actually, we've actually expanded the physical dimensions of Earth. But cosmically speaking, every celestial body, every planet has a gravitational influence, okay? And this gravitational influence extends out a certain amount of distance where it reaches, balances by the other thing. So in Earth's case, our gravitational influence extends out 1.5 million kilometers from the center, okay? Where it reaches where the gravitational influence of the sun sort of balances off. And this is a very useful area because it's called, you can put satellites there at the Lagrange points. There's this cosmic calculations and physics and stuff that you can put a satellite at this at the edge of this 1.5 million kilometers, and it will stay very stable there because that's where the balance is. So we have the James Webb Telescope. We just put at Lagrange point 2, which is looking out into the universe, and looking to see our origins. And at Lagrange point 1, which is between the Earth and the Sun, we have some years ago they put up a satellite called Discover, the Deep Space Climate Observatory. And it takes a picture of the Earth like every 10 minutes and something. So it's examining the climate on Earth and stuff. So those are two edges that actually have man-made objects at, which is the outer dimension of what I call greater Earth. Okay, this is greater Earth. And inside that sphere of 3 million kilometers. Can you imagine? 3 million kilometers is a big sphere. You can put 19,000 physical Earths in there, okay? But through that sphere passes 55,000 times more solar energy than falls on the surface of Earth. It's just, really a rich thing. And it also has the moon. And the moon is like the eighth continent. I mean, the moon has about the same square meters, not exactly, but similar to Africa. So there's a lot of territory there. So that's also inside there. And it's the Earth and the moon are held together by the gravity system. It's in a tidal lock situation. So you actually have the moon and you have a few asteroids passing here and there. So this is the region of Great Earth, and there's an enormous amount of resources in this region. And so we have to think beyond our atmosphere. And that's where space solar power comes in, because we can harness some of that 55,000 amount of solar energy passing through here and use that here instead of burning up, fossil fuels, which were also a source of solar energy. They were just buried many millions of years ago and got compressed into an energy source. So we could just change it. So I think we're at a stage in society where we have to make that transition. It's a threshold that we're at right now to go from the fossil fuel age into the space energy age. And the key to that is space-based solar power. And the best way to do that is to go to the moon.
One thing that I'm wondering is that it's not just a financial or a technical or a scientific question. It's very much an emotional issue as well. Like we talk about nuclear power, fission in particular, there's a lot of fear around it, some of it rational, some of it irrational. Uh, do you see that there's anything similar with the with the space-based solar power? First of all, for example, to my understanding, the microwave that is being beamed into Earth is perfectly safe. You can walk through it unharmed, but it sounds super scary. Do you think it could be a difficult hurdle to get people convinced to invest in that and live with it?
Well, definitely. I mean, everybody, obviously, that's the first objection that comes up. Oh, you could have put an energy beam that's going to kill everybody, and it could be used as a weapon. But I mean, if we would use laser, then yes, it would maybe could be used as a weapon. But microwaves cannot really be used as weapons in that sense. So uh, I don't think. And there's been studies done that shows that it doesn't affect. You know, I mean, you wouldn't want to. You know, yourself be in the middle of a beam. I mean, it actually has the heat of like a middle of the summer day on it, but you don't want to be totally exposed to intensive microwaves. But you would have a rectina that's fenced off, so that people wouldn't walk into there, or you can actually do agriculture under a rectina. But you might want to use robots instead of having people being there. Like, I mean, you could do other things, but it's the environmental impact has been looked at. And I mean, more studies need to be done to convince people that it's not a problem. But I mean, this has been looked at for 50 years, and these are the obvious first things that came up, and everybody believes that this is okay. Now, a problem might be the birds. They like the rectina in winter because it's so warm, and they're going to be always on the rectina, and that might be a problem to keep it clean. But uh, yeah, that's one aspect. The other thing is I don't really understand why there's not more enthusiasm for this idea because it is so clean. But it's maybe it like I said, maybe it's a problem of perception. We're not ready to really become a spacefaring species yet. You know, this is a real big jump, and therefore, you know, it should be looked at enthusiastically. And if you think if we had a technology that could address the climate situation and the energy security situation in a clean way, you would think everybody would want to have this. And actually, if you could do that, it would be so inspirational and so. In future generations, they would have their always on electricity, which they don't want to give it up. If you say we're going to take away your always on electricity, people are going to get really, really upset. You know, if they don't if they can't continue the way they are today. We're quite spoiled by that. So we have to come to that reality. If we don't do something soon, uh, uh, it's going to be a space age or a stone age. Let's be very realistic about this. If we cannot find an adequate source of clean energy, then I mean, you can live sustainable on Earth, but it's like people lived 200 years ago or 300 years ago, you know, which is
That's also like I feel that there's a clash in discourse in the sense that right now a lot of the clean and green conversation is about not spending so much energy, about winding down, and like there is a virtue in saving energy, and there you come in with your solution that lets everybody essentially waste as much energy as they like. So it can be difficult to turn your head around and suddenly think in a way that it's not decadent and it's not harmful to spend that much energy. And that can be difficult.
well, I think these people need to look at, there's a lot of data out there, like the energy use per person versus GDP. The countries that use more energy have a higher GDP than the countries that use less energy. So it really is a correlation to prosperity and energy use. So this is what's happened in the last 100 years. So, you know, I mean, for us in the prosperous countries, you know, we just take it for granted. But I mean, there's 800 million people in the world today who do not have access to electricity at all. Okay, 800 million
Hmm.
people from the United Nations. So, hey, They deserve to have some electricity. And there's like 2 billion people who are heating their houses with cow dung and wood and stuff like that. They don't even have adequate heating. So this is a major part of the world population that is totally energy starved. Okay? And they deserve to have access to clean energy. And this is one of the promises, let's say, sociologically, or that that this particular form of energy that we're talking about, if it was deployed on a major scale, you can make energy as ubiquitous as air or water. Everybody would just have access to it. But you know, energy is a very hot topic. I mean, hot, really, but it's also politically, I mean, there's so many global tensions about the production and the control of energy because, that keeps the rich people rich and the poor people poor. So, maybe that's why there's not a whole lot of interest in something like space-based solar power because it would upset the political status quo. But I mean, you can look at it right now. I mean, in the Ukraine-Russian war, I mean, energy is a big weapon being used. I mean, sanctioning Russian gas, blowing up the Nord Stream thing. It is a factor in all of this. So energy wars. I mean, America invading Iraq and all of the other countries down in the Middle East. I mean, definitely there was an energy motivation involved in all of those wars. So yeah, it's a big thing to maybe get beyond that way of thinking and try to think more holistically and more humanitarianly. Even in the production of space solar power, if one country does it, okay, maybe not England, but if maybe Europe, but if China would become the leader in space solar power, they would be totally, uh, it would be a conflict, okay? And the same if America does it, it would be a conflict because, to control the energy source of such a dimension, a very, very, very big problem. So we have to also put this in that context. And that's actually part of our program. We've proposed to create a Greater Earth Energy Organization that would be a multinational treaty organization to co-develop with a multinational group of nations to develop this concept, especially going to the moon, also demands to have a global approach. So we think that's the most viable way to do it. And it would, first off, coming back to the financing, it's a way to finance, to underwrite the initial investment. Because when I mentioned the 16 billion for one space solar powered project to be developed, if we would go to the moon, it's obviously going to be a lot more expensive. So we put a price tag on it. It's about 100 billion to go to the moon, to set up manufacturing facilities on the moon. But if countries would join in that and underwrite, it's easy for the countries just to guarantee the investment. They don't even have to spend the money. And actually, the money they would invest, it works like the European Space Agency. European Space Agency has a budget. They have like 22 countries that contribute to that budget. Like, for example, Switzerland contributes 188 million euros this year into the European Space Agency. But a large percentage of that, let's say 80%, comes back to Swiss industries and organizations. They spend the money back in Switzerland. So Switzerland is involved in space development, but the money comes back to their industries and their universities and stuff. So the Greater Earth Energy Organization would function much like that. You would have this fair return from the members. So they're not really wasting the money or just spending it out the window. The money in the development process would come back to their own uh, organizations and institutions. So that's one way. But this would underwrite this cost. And also, you would have these countries working together. They would want it to work in a collaborative way, and so that would defuse or de-risk the geopolitical dimensions. So that to me is actually as important in this approach to do it to do it that way, and especially going to the moon because, yeah, it's not gonna you're not gonna put an American flag on the moon or a European flag on the moon or a Chinese flag on the moon. This should really be a global project that everybody shares in it, and if you get clean energy out of it, it makes it really worthwhile. So that's why we find that our approach of producing space solar power components from lunar materials on the moon has so many positive aspects to it. If we could do it, we have to go there first to find out. But if we could do it, that would be fantastic. So also, not only the economic dimension, like I said, we have a huge energy market on Earth, even just to replace fossil fuels on Earth, 2.5 trillion a year. But we also have, the vision of going beyond uh, the atmosphere of Earth and actually becoming a two-planet economy. Okay, the moon being the other planet, you would actually have a new business case going back, and all things would. You can just imagine all of the stuff that would grow out of such a concept. But if you have a business case to do it, rather than an exploration case or a political case, it makes much more sense. So
So
that
tell me, how does a small company from Switzerland even begin to build an international organization of nations, essentially? I mean, it sounds like a daunting task. How do you move forward? How do you start it?
well, we make interviews with nice people, and who knows? You plant seeds everywhere, and actually, so much has happened since we published our report, and luckily, uh, the experts at the European Space Agency did not find any critical issues with our report. Okay, we worked on it really hard, and I mean, there's so many possibilities there, but there was no showstoppers. Okay, we took a very simplified approach. We wanted to find the most simple technologies that could realistically be done. Okay, and we found a production of photovoltaics. Most people think there's a lot of silicon on the moon, so you make photovoltaics on the moon on silicon. Silicone wafer technology is very, very complicated. It needs a lot of water and other stuff. So silicone was out. But there's a company, or let's say a university, uh, in Estonia that's been researching with the European Space Agency grants the idea of producing photovoltaic material from pyrite. And pyrite can be synthesized on the moon from sulfur oxide and sulfur. So they are working on this technology, and actually, it's connected to a technology that actually exists commercially in Vienna. There's a company called Crystasol, and they produce what is called monograin layer photovoltaics out of another material, CZST, out of copper and another powder. But that particular technology exists. It is available commercially. So we could modularize, actually very small facilities to do this. We could modularize such a facility and send it to the moon. And if we could, harvest out of regolith the necessary materials to make pyrite, we could start making photovoltaics on the moon. So we identified that, and it makes sense. There doesn't seem to be any technical barriers. It needs to be invested. I mean, we need to get the efficiency level of this technology up a bit more to make it more interesting. But it's there. And also, we thought, well, how do you build the structure? What would you use? Okay, we could have to get all of this metals and stuff, but we identified to use basalt. Basalt is a very, very interesting material. It's used on Earth. It's been around for 100 years. You can make tubes out of it. You can make fiber out of it. Very much, so it's a very, very versatile material, and it's not affected by the temperature differences in temperature so much. So it would be a very good thing. So this technology exists, and actually, basalt fiber is being researched in the university in Aachen. Okay, they are making out of lunar regolith simulant. They're making basalt fiber. So that's another thing. It was our other thing, and the other idea that we came up with to is that if we're going to build solar power satellite components on the surface of the moon, we have to transport them from there to put them to assemble them in space. And so there is a point near the moon at the Lagrange point. It's another Lagrange point system called the Earth Moon Lagrange Point 1. And it's a semi-stable region, and that would be a great place for assembling things. So we said, okay, we would assemble them there. And the way to do that is this is probably the most exotic thing that people, you know, raise their hand or have a question mark, is that the most elegant way to do it is to use a lunar space elevator. Okay, and a lunar space elevator is a cable that goes from the surface of the moon up to the Lagrange point 1, where we would assemble, but it would extend much farther, almost to geostationary orbit on Earth. So you'd have this long cable. Now, this sounds really fantastic, but all of the studies we looked at, and there's a number of studies that have looked at this over the year, they think it's feasible and it can be done with existing materials. Now, there's the concept of the Earth space elevator, and this is still waiting for some breakthrough in graphene or nanotechnology to have a fiber that's strong enough. But we don't really need that. In fact, there's several commercially available materials today, such as Xylon and Dynama, which would be totally have the right amount of strength in order to make such a cable. And actually, studies have shown that the first cable could be deployed for something like 2 to 3 billion, if you have the right launch system and you could deploy it. So you have the first one, and then you would build on it, you would expand on it. So then you actually have climbers, like it's an elevator technology. It's also an old technology. We've had elevators for hundreds of years. So you would actually have climbers on the thing to transport the materials from the moon to the assembly point. And
so while some people have been waiting for jetpacks, I've definitely been waiting for space elevator. So that would be lovely. But
well,
yeah, I guess it sounds like the lunar space elevator will come before the Earth space elevator. It'll be easier there, huh?
definitely easier. I mean, you could build it tomorrow. So it's much better than waiting 20 years to build the Earth space elevator. And I know the guys, I have really good friends that are involved in the Earth space elevator development. And, they don't want to see the lunar elevator happen first, but they think if we do this one, that would be better. But anyway, they have a good idea. And they have, if the technology advances, that's good. I mean, it also solves part of the problem, how to launch lots of stuff off the surface of Earth into space. And just to put that into perspective, since the beginning of the space program, since Sputnik, okay, humanity's launched about 15,000 metric tons of stuff into space. And we're talking about one space solar power satellites, 2,000, 5,000 metric tons for one, okay? So, and already the hope is from the space solar power community is that Starship is going to be so successful and it will make it happen because they will, from the cost point of view, they will be able to make it economically feasible if Musk wants to do space solar power satellites, which Musk actually wants to go to Mars. So we're not sure he's going to use his rockets for space solar power, and he's not 100% fan of space solar power. But the space solar power community is hoping that Starship will be so successful that they will have it. But then we have to deal with the environmental aspect of launching so many rockets to deploy space solar power satellites on the scale that I'm talking about. I'm talking about we need hundreds and eventually thousands of these satellites to have a real impact on the Earth energy market, if you want. Okay, so it's something that one has to think of, and in any way that you can avoid the environmental impact and maybe even make it more economically feasible should be looked at. And that's where I think, again, our lunar approach, and we're the only company in the world that's really pursuing this, has so much potential to make space-based solar power a viable contribution to the energy and climate situation.
So one thing I'm curious about, or what got me very interested when I first heard your presentation or webinar, is the fact that Usually, when I speak to space people, they are either scientists, engineers, or lawyers, but you are actually an artist. So, how does that change your view on space, or do you think you have a different perspective?
Well, definitely, I think that that makes a contribution to the whole topic because, and also my one of my closest colleagues, Andreas Vogler, who participated in the study, he's an architect. Okay, and we think in a different way. Uh, just to mention our other colleagues, Dmitry Gasprigovs he makes all of our beautiful videos. He's also a very visual person, and Patrick Collins, who has actually a PhD in space solar power. He's actually looks at it from the economic side. His work has been in economics. So yeah, well, just to give you a little bit of background why I'm into this is that I grew up at the space program in Florida. So I witnessed the beginnings of the American space program. My father moved our family there in 1959, and in the military, he was making liquid oxygen for the Redstone rocket, and the Redstone rocket became the Jupiter rocket. So he moved our family there in 1959, and so as a kid, I was like 9 years old. It was just fantastic. Once Kennedy said, "Let's go to the moon," they started testing rockets like crazy. So, like, I saw hundreds of rocket launches, and not all of them were successful, which was interesting. Everybody always ran outside to see if it was going to make it or not. And I actually worked in the Apollo program as a student. Okay, so I got summer jobs there, and my job was human email. They did not have email. We didn't have any communication system, computer system. You have to know that. So the scientists had to write their stuff down. They put in an envelope. They would give it to me, and I would take it to some other office somewhere on the Space Center. So we were human email. Can you imagine they went to the moon without email?
Hmm.
After that time, I started my art career, and I got very interested in the cosmos, and then I moved to Switzerland, and I got interested in particle physics. So I sort of had this technological aspect to my art anyway. And I lived in Lausanne, which was near CERN, and that sort of inspired me there too. But then in the mid 80s, I started to say, well, space, how can I put that into my art besides making pictures of planets? I didn't want to paint planet pictures. I go, how can I put that into my art? And I had this idea, my big idea, Arthur's big idea in 1985 was to celebrate the new millennium, the year 2000, to transition to youth, with a big thing in space. You know, I wanted to put a satellite up, my own satellite. And it was called the Orbiting Unification Ring Satellite. And I wanted it to be visible to the whole world. So, and not just as a spot of light, but something visible like a circle. So, circle's very simple, and it's a symbol, unity, etc. And I go, the world's definitely going to want something big in the year 2000. So let's start that idea. So I had no idea how to do this as an artist. All right, but I made some I made some sketches and some drawings and stuff. And actually, in Switzerland, in 1986, there was a trade fair called Space Commerce that took place in Montreux in 1986. And so I heard about that. And I called up the organizers and go, hello, I'm an artist that I have some ideas and I'd like just to show my stuff to participate in this. And they go, well, we're open. I mean, if you're willing to pay the square meter price with all of the other companies like British Aerospace, and, Northrop Grumman and Airbus, you're welcome to come and have your own space there. Just make a nice presentation. So I go, okay, let's do it. So I put together a presentation and I went there and I had no idea. I go, this was an opportunity to have feedback from the space community of my idea. Not necessarily if they liked it or not, but is it possible or not? So I was there, and actually, quite a few the people came by. Yeah, that's possible. My idea was you would put a big roll of mylar in the space shuttle, send the space shuttle up, and let it go, and it would just sort of go out and make a loop, and then you would have it, And that was my idea. I mean, I had no idea. I'm not an engineer, but interestingly, the stand next to me, the exhibition stand next to me, was a Swiss company called Contraves. They no longer exist. They've been absorbed into the Ruag thing today. But this company Contraves, and they were exhibiting an inflatable antenna. They were a technology they were working on. And this technology had been sponsored by the European Space Agency to make something very lightweight for space. And I go, oh, that's a good technology for doing what I wanted. So I talked to the people there, and they go, well, you should talk to our head of research and development, a guy named Dr. Marco Bernasconi. He's leading the technology program. And, he can advise you if this would be useful. So I got in touch with uh, Marco Bernasconi, and he really liked my idea. Basically, we got along very well, and he got the permission from his company to advise me officially. Okay, so so together we came up with this idea to put this circle in the sky. It would be an object out of this Contraves inflatable technology. It would inflate and rigidize in space. A very interesting technology that even today hasn't been really used that much in space, but very fantastic thing. And this could be done. You could launch it with an Ariane 5, and it would work, and it would be about the quarter of the size of the moon in the sky as a circle, and it would last for about maybe 2 or 3 weeks before it would burn up in the atmosphere, but it would be just enough to do our thing. And actually, uh, they had built at Contraves a small torus. Okay, a torus is a round object, 6 meters in diameter, and I go, hey, that would be a good prototype, you don't want to go from nothing to 1 kilometer. And so in 1988, Montreux had the second version of Space Commerce, and I was back with a bigger stand. And by coincidence, the Soviet Union had a stand. It was their first public, they wanted to open their space program up to commercial participation. And so they were there. So I go, wow. So I proposed to them that we would take this 6 meter diameter torus and make a prototype out of it, which we called the Space Peace Sculpture, and we would send it to the Mir station. Yeah, well, that's doable. Let's do it. So we signed a letter of intent. That was actually the second commercial agreement that the Soviets signed with a foreign entity. I got a lot of press. It was all over the world in the press. Oh, this artist is going to do this and thing. So that was good. So we started working on this. That I had an agreement, and the Russian technologists, they sent us a lot of technical details, how to package it and send it to the Mir station. And the idea is that we would send it to the Mir, and it would be sent out into space, and an astronaut maybe would push it out into the universe, and we would video this. It'd be a great artistic performance. Okay, so everything was going fine, and I visited Moscow a few times to talk to the technician. But unfortunately, once we got really serious and we got sponsors sort of involved, the Swiss company Contraves, for whatever reason, and I still don't know, they decided, no, we're not going to support this project. I don't know.
Oh.
Maybe they didn't like working with the Russians. I don't know what it was. Maybe they didn't want to see their technology used for an artwork first. I don't know what it was. I really don't know to this day. Even though Marco, and he was very upset when they said no. So so we go, oh gosh, our project. And we wanted to do this in 1992 to celebrate the International Space Year. So I went back to Moscow and I go, "Well, bad news. We lost our technology." And the people in Russia, they said, well, Mr. Woods, that's too bad, but we have our own technology. We'll make you a package deal. We'll build it and fly it, and all you have to do is pay for it. So we go, oh, well, that was good. So actually, we went forward with this idea, and in 1990, Montreux happened again, the Space Commerce 90, and the Russians brought me a full-size 6 meter diameter inflatable sculpture to the stand, which we we pumped up with a hand pump, and we actually displayed it in the Congress at that time. So that was, I mean, their technology would have worked because they'd actually tested it in space already. So this was very cool. So things would continue to go forward until the next year. Of course, the Soviet Union crashed. Okay, into the Soviet. So we lost any kind of, you know, direct contact with who we're dealing with. Nobody knew. I mean, the Soviet Union was falling apart. Nobody could deal with it. So, we had to take the setback, and so everything got postponed. And then, interesting, in 1992, I got contacted through a German company that were working with Russians, and they go, look, they're still interested to work with you. Do you have something smaller that you could maybe send into space? Something that we could do quickly because they would really like it. So I go, well, I'm working on these sculptures here on Earth of geometric things. And I go, I could design one for the interior of the Mir station. And so we made a contract that I could send a 1 kilogram sculpture to the Mir space station at a price of $100,000 for 1 kilogram. So think today it costs $2,000 on or $3,000 on Falcon 9 to send something to space. I had a deal 1993, 1992, 93, $100,000 for 1 kilogram. But I said, okay, and I think I have to figure out how to pay for it. But we made a deal. So, and inside 6 months from signing that agreement, we were able to fly a sculpture inside the Mir space station called the Cosmic Dancer. You can look it up at cosmicdancer.com. It's really beautiful, and it's the first three-dimensional object actually designed for an interior for a space habitat that actually flew as an official project. And it's actually very beautiful, and I always show it with some classical music, so it's very poetic. So I had the ability to organize a space project. I mean, this was a real space project. This wasn't some, I mean, the sculpture had to be certified. It had to be tested against, it had to be sterilized. It had to be stable. And it was made out of welded aluminum so that it wouldn't burn. There was no danger involved. So it was a real space program. And we sent a prototype to Moscow where the cosmonaut crew, before they went into space, they practiced with it, how they would deal with it inside the Mir station. So we have all of this really historic video of them playing with the sculpture before they went into space. And then finally, some months later, it arrived when they were there already. It was really, really, really cool. So actually, it was a real space program that I organized. I mean, not too many individuals, especially in the 1990s, okay, organized flew anything in space as an individual, really. So it's quite a unique thing that somebody could actually do that. But then the European Space Agency, 2 years later, they had a project called Euromir 95, where they were sending a European astronaut to the Mir station, Thomas Reiter. So I wrote to ESA, to the head of the manned spaceflight program, and I go, look, why don't we take this opportunity and do something cultural, and let's make an art exhibition on the Mir station. And we would organize an international cooperation, and we know the right materials to use, and we'd ask artists to make artworks like on A4 paper, and we would have a jury and a selection, and we would send these to the Mir station, and he said, that's a good idea, let's do it. So right, so we're really ready after the success of 1993. Here it's time to do another space project. And unfortunately, the ESA Public Relations Department was not so happy that somebody decided this without their input. But anyway, long story short, it happened. And so we sent 20 artworks to the Mir station. And there, the crew, the two Russians and Thomas Reiter, they put them up on the Mir station on the wall. They stuck them up with Velcro, and they looked at them for a whole week, and then they decided which ones they liked best. They picked 3 they liked the best, and then one of those was selected, and a work by Elizabeth Carroll Smith, and that stayed on the Mir station, and the other 19 works came back to Earth, and we had sponsors. We had Omega was a sponsor, the watch company Omega, and Lasco, the Swiss paint company, was a sponsor. So we was a really nice project. So that was the second mission in space, and it took a lot of organizational work. So I actually have this background. But what happened is that, with Marco and I, people were questioning us, why put art into space? There's nobody there.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you waste all of this money? You asked before, it costs so much money. Why do you spend all this money to do this? And there's nothing there. Space, art. Hey? And so in the end, when we talked about our projects, we had to defend why space is so important. Okay. So we had to convince people we're doing this to bring attention to space because space is so important. It's like today.
Yeah.
And we came up with a concept called the space option, which is a choice, an option, or the space option, where it actually condensed down that you would harness the extraterrestrial materials in space and you bring them to Earth at a conspicuous level to benefit humanity. So in our case, it's of course energy. We were already thinking of how to do that. So we actually worked on this philosophical idea of the space option, and humanity has to make a choice, and that's where we are today. And I'm talking about the transformation from the fossil fuel age to the space energy age
Mm-hmm.
is a choice that humanity will have to confront. If they don't do it, like I said, it's space age or stone age. If we don't have enough consistent, powerful energy to power society, we're going to really step back to way people used to live hundreds of years ago. So we're at this point right now, the space option. And out of the space option concept grew the idea of greater Earth because uh, that was just another philosophical dimension. So greater Earth is actually a new perception of our planet. And that's what I said here. We have to work on perceptions because people are just content to think what they think they know already. And we have to open their minds to that. The Earth is not defined by its atmosphere. It's very beautiful, but actually it has a larger dimension. You have to scientifically, it has a larger dimension. We just have to become aware of it, and that opens up all of these other things, resources from space. A lot of our really nasty mining industries, they could be done in space, and they would not pollute our atmosphere, our biosphere anymore. You could do all kinds of metal processing from asteroids and stuff, and send just the finished products down to Earth, and you wouldn't pollute the atmosphere with all of the nasty stuff that goes in with mining and metallurgy and stuff like that. So therefore, we need to think in another dimension, and we have the technology. Humanity has evolved, and the fossil fuel age actually gave us the means to develop space technology. I mean, it wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
have happened without that. And here we are. What are we going to do with this technology? I mean, technology always has two sides to it. I mean, like my father worked for the Redstone rocket in the military, which was it was a small nuclear delivery system to send it was a weapon. And the same rocket was used to send Alan Shepard into space. The same exact rocket, this one with a bomb on it, and the other with a person on it. So this is our technology today. Most technology. Let's look at AI. How are we going to use AI today? Is it going to help us, or it's going to take over? We have to make these decisions, and so that's where we come back to the space option. We have a choice to make, a cosmic choice, and I think where are all of the other civilizations out there in the galaxy? Maybe they ran into the same problem where they developed technology and then they didn't make it. The technology, could be the end of them. That could be the case. Who knows? But humanity's at this point, and actually, I'm going to get really philosophical now. Actually, it's not just about humanity, because as far as we know, I mean, we're the only conscious creatures on Earth that really think and build things. But as far as we know, we have not discovered life anywhere else in the universe. And we're looking all of the time for it. And we think we've been visited and stuff like that. We don't really have proof that it's actually happened. So, for life to have evolved on Earth, took really a unique set of circumstances. Okay, without the moon, there would not be any life on Earth. The gravitation of the moon slowed down the rotation of the Earth. So otherwise, you would have hundreds of kilometers an hour of rotation here. Nothing would survive and live. And also, it caused the tides to form, which might have been the organic soup that started the life process. So we're in a very unique situation with our sun, and we're in the perfect position from the sun, and we have this moon that stabilized everything, and so we're very unique. So therefore, we don't know how unique life is itself. I mean, life could be, even to our galaxy, we might be the only real life as far as the life like we know it. So therefore, we need to preserve life, not just on the planet, but in order to ensure its survivability, we should plant the seeds of life off the planet Earth, maybe on the moon, maybe on Mars, whatever. But that would help life to ensure its ultimate survivability. And I mean, sooner or later, the sun is going to expand, and then life on Earth is going to be over in another 3 or 4 billion years anyway. But at the moment, it's this threshold where humanity needs to save its civilization and its society, but also this could be driven by a life force that wants to survive, and survival is the strongest force of life at all. Okay, so that we could be a part of that, and we're just playing our role. And those who see the possibility of using space technology in a very positive way on Earth, they actually are maybe playing a part in a bigger picture, in a bigger game, without really knowing what's going on. So I see it in that thing, and I think it comes back to being an artist. I've been thinking in cosmic terms as an artist and stuff like this. So Andreas Vogler, my colleague, we don't call ourselves engineers; we call ourselves visioneers. Our thing is to visioneer the future, and we'll find the engineers to come and support us, and that's what that we're doing. So that's kind of been our approach.
That's a nice vision. I like that, the collaboration of art and engineers. I think that's actually also a very good moment to stop. We could continue the conversation forever, but at some point we need to put an end to it and find new opportunities later to continue from where we were here. So thank you so much, Arthur Woods from Astrostrom. It's been a real pleasure having you here and discussing these big ideas.
Indeed.
Well, that was really fun, and I can't imagine the hour is already gone. So great, but I'd be happy to come back at any time and talk with you again. And thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thanks a lot. And also thank you to our listeners. And just as a tip, if you like hearing stories from people who make the world a better place, or in this case, the greater Earth, if we want to think of the world as a bigger thing, through science and technology or art, you're in luck because there is more. So make sure to subscribe to the Future Makers podcast, for example, on Spotify or nowadays also on YouTube. Until next time.